king held out to Esther the golden scepter that was in his hand. So Esther drew near and touched the top of the scepter. Then said the king unto her, What wilt thou, Queen Esther, and what is thy request? It shall be even given thee to half of the kingdom. And Esther answered, If it seem good unto the king, let the king and Haman come this day unto the banquet that I have prepared for him. Then the king said, Cause Haman to make haste, they may do as Esther has said. So the king and Haman came to the banquet that Esther had prepared. And the king said unto Esther at the banquet of wine, What is thy petition? And it shall be granted of thee. What is thy request? Even to half the kingdom, and it shall be performed. Then answered Esther and said, My petition and my request is, if I have found favor in the sight of the king, and if it please the king to grant my petition and to perform my request, let the king and Haman come to the banquet that I shall prepare for them, and I will do tomorrow as the king has said. Then went Haman forth that day joyful and with a glad heart. But when Haman saw Mordecai in the king's gate, that he stood not up nor moved for him, he was full of indignation against Mordecai. Nevertheless, Haman refrained himself, and when he came home, he sent and called for his friends and Zeresh his wife. And Haman told them of the glory of his riches and the multitude of his children, and all these things when the king had promoted him, and how he advanced him above the princes and the servants of the king. Haman said moreover, Yea, Esther the queen did let no man come in with the king to the banquet that she had prepared but myself, when tomorrow am I invited in unto her also with the king. Yet all this availeth me nothing, so long as I see Mordecai the Jew sitting at the king's gate. Then said Zeresh his wife and all his friends to him, Let the gallows be made 50 cubits high, and tomorrow speak thou unto the king, that Mordecai may be hanged thereon. Then go in thou in merrily with the king into the banquet. And the thing pleased Haman, and he caused the gallows to be made. And so we stop there. Sierra, would you begin reading for us tonight out of our pamphlet here? Go ahead and just grab verse 1 and the thoughts to go along with it.
Now it came to pass on the third day that Esther put on her royal apparel and stood in the inner court of the king's house over against the king's house. And the king sat upon his royal throne in the royal house over against the gate of the house. I'm not sure about the third day, but the only thing I can think about 3, that was the sign given, as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the fish's belly, so shall the Son of Man be 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the earth. This is the only sign given this sinful generation. She represents the church, and Christ is the head of the church. In this we see Esther willing to give her life for her people, just like Christ gave his life for his church. We also see Esther putting on a royal apparel on the third day. Christ put on the glorified body on the third day. We must have on the right apparel to enter in. Christ put on that glorified body and could therefore enter into the presence of God and sit down at the right hand. Esther put on the royal apparel, and she could not have entered in before the king. If we do not have the right apparel, we will not enter in. In fact, if it will be death if we are found not dressed properly. There is a certain order to things.
Thank you. Were there any thoughts or questions about that section? I'm trying to find something really quick that came to mind.
Is the analogy for being dressed properly related to us being spiritually ready?
Yeah, I would say so. I think in chapter 4, when he brought up the same point, it was he was referencing the wedding feast, the parable of the wedding feast, where Jesus had told of those who were invited but weren't clothed in the right garment. I think it does have a spiritual connotation to it. certainly if the priests weren't clothed in their proper garment when they were going into the temple, they wouldn't have been allowed to go into the temple. Thinking of the high priest and his special garments that God had told them to make for him. Let's see it here. There is significance as well to the third day. I can't find it right offhand, but we see it come up, this phrase of be ready against the third day, be ready for the third day. And it is very significant. We see 3.5 days, 2 divisions of 3.5 days being pictured in the return of Christ. There in Daniel we're given those 2 segments of 3.5 years. Revelation echoing the very same things. The third day is a very important symbol. It's a very important thing. Of course, neither prepared nor do we have the time to go into it completely this evening, but should be noted is very, very important. Were there any other comments or questions on that section? If not, Tony, would you go ahead and grab Esther 5, the verse 2 and 3, and just stop short of verse 4 and 5, but yeah, just go ahead and stop short of verse 4 and 5. Though that's a fairly long section there.
Okay. Esther 5, 2 and 3 says, And it was so, when the king saw Esther the queen standing in the court, that she obtained favor in his sight. The king held out to Esther the golden sepulchre, and it was in his hand. So Esther drew near and touched the top of the scepter. Then said the king unto her, What wilt thou, Queen Esther, and what is thy request? It shall be given thee to the half of the kingdom. Joint heirs with the kingdom, that is what we are with Christ. We too will share all the promises of God from the beginning of time with Christ. Romans 8:17-18 says, And if children, then heirs of God, and joint heirs with Christ, if so be that we suffer with him, that we may also be glorified together. For I reckon that the sufferings of this present time are not worthy to be compared with the glory which shall be revealed in us. So we are talking about Esther receiving half the kingdom. So too we receive the kingdom with our king.
Thank you. Are there any thoughts or questions on that section?
Yeah, you can see the love that God had for, or the king had for Esther, to give her that much, up to half of the kingdom.
Yeah.
So we know that, God does the same for us.
Exactly. And it also echoes what we see with Joseph, what we see with Daniel, being put in the position of second in command, even though they neither were, well, I don't know about Daniel, but certainly Joseph was not a firstborn son, but he had that position of firstborn and came into that inheritance of really the second most powerful position in the entire kingdom of Egypt. Were there any other thoughts or questions on that section before we move on?
I thought it was interesting that he didn't touch on the fact that Esther had to touch the scepter, because scepter is supposed to represent Jesus Christ, like that initial thing before even talking to her or doing anything. He said he wanted her to touch that. So it's just interesting that he didn't point that out.
Yeah, that is a good point, though. That scepter being, what's the one I want? Being symbolic of Christ. her coming up and making contact with her. Physical contact was very important as she came before the king. Good thoughts. Good thoughts. Are there any others? If not, I'll continue on and I'll just grab this next section here. Esther 5 verses 4 and 5 said, "And Esther answered, If it seemed good unto the king, let the king and Haman come this day into the banquet that I have prepared for him. And the king said, Cause Haman to make haste, that he may do as Esther has said. So the king and Haman came to the banquet that Esther prepared." Earlier, Esther had told Mordecai for him and all the Jews to fast 3 days. And she and her maidens would fast 3 days. Then she put on her royal apparel to enter in before the king on that 3rd day. We know Jesus was in the grave 3 days and 3 nights before he entered in before God and put on the royal apparel. He put off the old and put on the glorified body. And this all presents a beautiful picture of what is taking place. I think Esther is the most beautiful book in all the Old Testament, putting forth what the kingdom of God will be like and what will take place. Notice also what was offered Esther when she put on the royal apparel and entered in before the king. We too, when we put on that royal apparel, will enter in before our king. The Old Testament taught about the kingdom, but the Jews could never see how it was truly to be except a few. Jesus came teaching the kingdom, and most could not understand what he was talking about. We know Abraham saw that city afar off and desired it, and we must have these same desires. The gift of God is salvation, but to his sons he has brought them into a position to rule and reign. Lost people, and even a lot of saved people, cannot understand these teachings of the kingdom. How many people understood Jesus, the Son of God? In Esther, we are studying the kingdom of God. John the Baptist was in prison, and there was no man born to woman greater than John. And we are told that he will be one of the least in the kingdom. Why? When he was in prison and was about ready to die, he sent one of his disciples to ask Jesus if he was truly the one, or if they should look for another. A lot of us can have strong faith and believe up to a point. Are we to blame John for this doubt? No. We ourselves get in the same position. We may even wonder sometimes if we are truly saved. Jesus sent word back to John to tell him, the blind see, the deaf hear, and the gospel is preached to the poor. What was so unusual about the gospel being preached to the poor? Usually the only ones that went into those temples in the days of Jesus were people who went in to make a show. Occasionally there were others, like the poor widow who gave the penny, and she received the greater blessing. In the 4th verse, we see Esther had invited the king and Haman to the banquet. She had already planned what to do about Haman. We find also that the things which will happen to Satan have already been prepared from before the foundation of the earth. God has always laid out his plans for his people, as well as for Satan and his people. He wants us to become sons of God, but if we do not want that, he will not force us. God has plans for his people to become gods just like he is. But if you tell people this, they think you're crazy. When Jesus said he was the Son of God, they took up stones to stone him. And it should be mentioned, just for clarity, when he says God has plans for his people to become gods just like he is, that is the possessive. That's not saying that God has plans to make us God, or other gods like some people believe. Are there any thoughts or questions for that section? It was a little bit lengthy. We covered a lot there.
One thing, when reading it all together, when I reading it before looking at the commentary, and we got to like verses 2 and 3 and 4 and 5, it made me think of like a model prayer
Mhm.
kind of situation, just because God offers Esther. It says, "And what is thy request? It shall be even given thee to the half of the kingdom." Like he's offering
Yeah.
like so much to her without her even asking for anything, and that's like what God does for us. And then when Esther does ask her request, she then says, she says, "If it pleases you." She basically says like, if it's your thing. I just feel like that's how we're. Like God will bless us, but you have to have a humble heart when we ask for things. Make sure it's His will. And I just want to be a good model prayer situation.
Yeah, that's a very, very good point. No demands were made by Esther. She knew what she wanted to ask, but the way that she went about it was humble, knowing that she and her desires and even her life were at the whim of the king. Good thoughts. Any other thoughts or questions on that section? Not, Brother Joe, would you like to grab verse 6 for us? And then we'll give you 7 and 8 as well, but we'll have you pause after verse 6 there.
5 and 6, verse 6. How far you want me to go?
Go ahead and just read the verse and the thought there, and then we'll pause for consideration, then we'll have you read 7 and 8 as well.
And the king said unto Esther at the banquet of wine, What is thy petition? And it shall be granted thee. What is thy request? Even to the half of the kingdom it shall be performed. Here again the king is letting Esther know that what she has come into is up to half of the kingdom. She is joint heir. This is exactly what the church has come to.
Thank you. Are there any thoughts or questions on that section? That really makes me think of when Jesus tells his apostles, his disciples, that he goes to prepare a place for them, where they would, or where he was, that there they would be also. This promise that they do have something to look forward to. They do have something that is going to be given to them, the same way that we have hope for that as well. If there weren't any other thoughts there, would you go ahead and grab 7 and 8 and the comments go along with that as well?
Then answered Esther and said, My petition and my request is, if I have found favor in the sight of the king, and it please the king to grant my petition and to perform my request, let the king and Haman come to a banquet that I shall prepare for them, and I will do tomorrow as the king has said. The rest of it is right there. Notice, she said, I have found favor. She knew if she did not find favor in the eyes of the king, she would not receive anything. It is not so with the church. If what we're doing isn't favorable in the eyes of God, how will we expect to inherit? Although a lot of prayers come from good people, they go no higher than the ceiling because they have not found favor with God. Even though we may think we're doing right, if it's not God's way, it's wrong. We can be a vessel of honor or a vessel of dishonor. But either way, God is the one who will receive the glory. A potter who made things from clay, if he made something and it was not right, or if he was dissatisfied with it, he would take a steel rod and break it. That way there was nothing out there with his name on it that he could be proud of. The same with us and God. If we are a vessel of dishonor, God cannot be proud of us.
Thank you. Were there any thoughts or questions on that section?
You know, I've always read that about the potter would break his thing, but I never thought that was why he was doing it, because he didn't want it out there that would look bad with his name on it. You know.
Yeah.
That kind of, I never know. That never really hit until today.
Yeah. I remember hearing a story on the radio one time of a man that had went to see a traditional potter. And the man had this little shack that was sitting over the top of a hole. And this man, as he was getting ready to make something out of the clay, went into the shack and reached down into the hole and scraped the sides and pulled out this ball of clay, this miry clay. He brought it in and started working with it. And as he had it on the wheel there, and as he was just working this ball of clay, stones would present themselves, and he'd throw out the stones, the roots or the twigs, and eventually it got to the point where this ball of clay just was throwing so many issues, so many imperfections as he was trying to work with it, that he took it off of his table and he put it aside. The man had asked, well, why did you do that? And the potter was going to make something fine out of it, right? A fine piece of pottery work, like a goblet or something like that. And he said, "There's too many stones. I can't make this fine pottery that I want to with it. So it's going to go over there and it'll be made into something that's not as fine, something less desirable, because that piece of clay was had so many issues in it. It wouldn't make a piece of pottery that was of the quality that this man was looking for, right? For something that would go and be used and sold as a fine piece of pottery. And the parallel that was drawn was, God does a lot of the same things with us. He wants to make us into fine vessels. He wants to make us as vessels of honor. But we as the pieces of clay, as he's working with us and as he's molding us and shaping us, if all we ever do is throw him stones, right? If all we ever do is cause issues and things like that, we're not going to be a piece of clay that's deemed worthy or deemed able to be that presentable vessel of honor, be that fine piece of pottery. Will be put aside and turned into another kind of vessel, something where the high quality doesn't necessarily matter. But, make of it what you will. It's just a story that came to mind. But that aside, were there any other thoughts or questions on that section before we move on? If not, Sierra, would you go ahead and probably just finish up page for us, but we'll stop after every scripture.
Then went Haman forth that day joyfully and with a glad heart. But when Haman saw Mordecai in the king's gate, then that he stood not up nor moved for him, he was full of indignation against Mordecai. Hasn't Satan always tried to get mankind to bend or bow to his word instead of heed what God says, it upsets Satan, too, when we do not. Now, if you are putting forth a false doctrine, Satan will provide the money and power necessary for it to go forth.
Thank you. Any thoughts or questions on that? That does ring true, even on a smaller scale, right? Look at how many churches that we would see as being successful by our standards, right? Small church, have a history of very small churches, just a few people. And we see some of these churches that, they might get quite a bit right. They grow, they have more curb appeal, and so they get into 50, 60, 70 members or more, and we wonder, well, what is it that they're doing that is so right? Why are they growing so well when we seem to be unable to even cap 20 or 30 members? I think that when you do go to a lot of those churches, and of course it's not true for all of them, but you don't have to sit for very long to hear these errors that they're teaching. A lot of the evangelical movement, a lot of these easy believisms, if you will, that are taught in a lot of churches today. They're very appealing for people, but they aren't the truth. I don't know about the rest of you, but I'd rather just a smattering who are willing to hear the truth than hordes who I have to lie to. But if there weren't any other thoughts or comments on that section, would you go ahead and go to 10 and 11 for us?
Nevertheless, Haman refrained himself, and when he came home, he sent and called for his friends and Zeresh, his wife. And Haman told them of the glory of his riches and the multitude of his children, and all the things wherein the kingdom had promoted him, and how he had advanced him above the princes and servants of the king. Now Haman had 10 sons. We understand a few things about numbers and what they mean, like 3 or 7 or 6. 10 sometimes represents nations. Certainly Satan's sons rule this earth, and they are in control of it at the present time along with him.
Are there any thoughts or questions on that section?
How do we know he had 10 sons?
It's a very good question. When I was just reading it, I thought it was there in the text, but you do make a good point. It's not there.
Like, it's a good symbol if it is there, but I just didn't know where 10 came from.
Yeah. I'm not sure. Very good question. Any others? For whatever reason, I was reading this and getting it ready. I thought of Daniel, how he was really the opposite of Haman. He was very much the same position as the king's right-hand man, and given a great deal of power and authority, but when he was very humble about it. Right? He had a very humble heart, but here we see Haman, really the total opposite, letting this power and these riches go to his head. Make of it what you will. It's just what I thought of when I was reading through this. If there weren't any other thoughts or questions there, would you go ahead and finish up that? Finish it up, please.
Haman said moreover, Yea, Esther the queen did let no man come in with the king unto the banquet that she had prepared but myself, and tomorrow am I invited unto her, unto also with the king. Yet all this availeth me nothing, so long as I see Mordecai the Jew sitting at the king's gate. Then said Zeresh his wife and all his friends unto him, Let a gallows be made of 50 cubits high, and tomorrow speak thou unto the king that Mordecai may be hanged thereon. Then go thou and merrily with the king unto the banquet, and the things pleased Haman, and he caused the gallows to be made. Now these gallows were high enough that everyone would be able to see Mordecai hung. Later we'll see how where Haman is the very one who is hanged on his gallows. When Satan is destroyed, everyone will see him too. It is pretty much the same way in our lives. It's usually the things we do which causes our spiritual death or even our physical death.
Thank you. All right. Thoughts or questions for the resolution of that chapter? If not, look forward to making it into chapter 6 next week. I am tempted to at least get chapter 7 ready and printed as well, just so that if we do have extra time after chapter 6 is done, we can start on chapter 7. But we'll see how that goes. But if there weren't any other thoughts or questions, I thank you for your time, for your attention and your participation. And we'll go ahead and stand. And let's kill the camera real quick.